But the important thing to remember is if you use the higher quality formats, the key benefit is going to be quality of experience, particularly for mobile viewers.
Right, we're trying to create a next generation codec that's state-of-the-art for the web, and that's not restricted to just royalty-free. We really want it to be the best codec possible.
In total, there were roughly 200 different organizations involved, and probably around 1,000 individuals if you also count the back office supporters.
And for H.264, the big question is how much longer will you continue to encode in H.264? So what does H.264 give you? It gives you ubiquitous compatibility for both live and VOD. So this is a website called Can I Use, and green is good, red is bad. And you see that H.264 pretty much plays everywhere. The only browser it doesn't play in is Opera Mini, but everywhere else it plays. It gives you ubiquitous playback in computer browsers and mobile browsers. And it does a pretty good job in OTT and smart TV as well. It plays everywhere there as well. This is a sheet from Wowza streaming engine, and as you can see, you can use H.264 on almost every, or in every streaming protocol that they support. So, and if you look at Nimble Streamer, which is another product like the Wowza streaming engine, you get the same compatibility with the formats. And what's it cost you that's not in dollars? It costs you storage and bandwidth. Because it's such an inefficient format, you're paying more to stream it. So according to Netflix, and you can see the bit.ly link there, X265 and BP9 are up to 50% more efficient than H.264.
So this figure is actually from the formal verification test of HEVC when they compare the reference software of HEVC, do a subjective test, compare that to the reference software of H.264 AVC. And you'll see for this particular sequence that if you want a really good quality, like 8.5 mean opinion score, with the H.264 AVC, you need almost 16 megabits per second, while with HEVC, you can go below 8 megabits per second.
So this is the Netflix ISP speed index. And what this is a measure of how the bandwidth that Netflix is able to push through their prime carriers in every country. So this is Sweden. If you look at the United States, it's around the same. It's around 4 megabits per second. So what this tells you is that Netflix can deliver about 4 megabits per second of video during prime time viewing. So even though we know, I got 80 megabits per second in my little home in Virginia, and Anders, I think, had 500 megabits per second last night, it doesn't really help you if you're an OTT provider and you can't push video beyond the 4 megabits through that download speed. And that's an important number. The big question for H.264 is how much longer will we be encoding in H.264? And the answer is forever. I just don't see H.264 going away anytime in the short term, even in the medium term.
What we'll see is you have here is a description of some of the major features or tools in HEVC, and I've also put here a comparison to what are the corresponding features in the previous standard, and you'll see that it's very much similar type of technology, but in HEVC you have more options. You have the ability to code in different sizes. So instead of, as you'll see to the right here, instead of always having a fixed block size predicting 16 by 16 pixels all the time, you have a choice of splitting up a large block into small blocks and adjusting to the content of how large portion can I predict in one go, or do I need to split it further? So that's the basic fundamental difference, that you have a lot of more flexibility. You have a few different new tools. For intra-prediction, for example, you have more directions to predict from previous pixels in the same frame, and so on. Interpolation filters is when you predict from a previous frame and you do a filtering, and you have better precision in HEVC than you had in H.264.
So in terms of compatibility, there are some strong points and there are some weak points. And the strong points are HLS. So you've got Mac OS, you've got iOS, you've got Apple TV, all now play HEVC. Windows 10 computers that have HEVC hardware, which is going to be most of them, also play HEVC, but they don't play HEVC and HLS. So it's important to differentiate HEVC compatibility and HEVC and HLS compatibility. Because Android, for example, plays HEVC, but it's not compatible with HEVC and HLS. So you'll have to do some kind of transmux in order to get to all of those different platforms. And then significantly, in the browser on Windows 10 and pre-computers, Chrome and Firefox do not support HEVC. So HEVC is a very, very good solution for HLS, but it's not a good solution for broad-based browser support in computers if that's a significant viewer base for you. Now, this is an article that posted on Streaming Media a couple days ago. We wanted to see how much extra CPU it took to decode HEVC on the iOS platforms. Why? Because additional CPU resources translate to less battery power, and nobody likes to reduce the battery power of phones and tablets. So what we did is we compared 6 devices, and this is not all devices, but it's some of the older devices in each supported group. So iOS devices go back to the iPhone 5. We didn't test the 5, we tested the 6. MacBook Pros go back to 2011. Or 2009, we tested 2010. And in every case, we either saw no difference in CPU usage or a very slight difference in CPU usage. And CPU usage doesn't translate directly to battery life, right? Just because it's 15% more doesn't mean you lose 15% battery life, because the screen is probably a bigger consumer than the CPU. The bottom line is we're in good shape for HEVC decode on the HLS supported HEVC platforms. I don't think you're going to see a significant hit in battery life on any of the platforms. And that was really good news. You do research, you never know what the result's going to turn out to be. This was a nice case where it came out favorable. So here's the Alliance for Open Media. This is the AV1 codec. Who are these people? They're pretty important people. So this was the group that was formed during the 2015 time where HEVC Advanced had unlimited royalties. And you saw Google, Microsoft, Mozilla, and Cisco on the codec side. They were all pursuing open source codecs. They decided to join their efforts. On the hardware side, you see a lot of important manufacturers there. The content side, a lot of important distributors there. Infrastructure suppliers like Bitmovin, Atem, and IBM. So really, the thing about this group is you're going to have browser support very soon after the bitstream is frozen. You're going to have content support very soon after the bitstream is frozen, and you're going to have hardware support as soon as possible after the bitstream is frozen. So if you're the product manager for a TV or a tablet that's going to be built in 2019, it would be very wise to support the AV1 codec because Netflix is going to support it, YouTube is going to support it, Hulu is going to support it, and Amazon's going to support it. So I think just the membership in this group pretty much guarantees that you're going to get a lot of support on the playback side down the road. What's AV1 give you? This is a slide from Mozilla, a presentation they gave at DMUX in San Francisco in October, and they say that AV1 gives you the same quality as X.265 at less than 75% of the bandwidth. And that's a pretty good number.
So where we are today is quite a bit further than hopefully where we last presented a slide like this. You'll see at the top headline, sort of 63 tools have been through a technical integration process. And this is really, each tool is sort of an algorithmic submission, and we'll go into more detail about that from one of the member companies. There's a few companies, Google, Mozilla, Cisco primarily, who've had codec development teams in the past, and so those are obviously sort of leading the effort. And there's a few tools, the 5 tools listed, that are conditionally adopted. And the reason I mention them is really to highlight the fact that this has been an iterative process, right? So all the tools that we've had have been through reviews with the hardware subgroup, with the other technical groups, in order to ensure that what we're putting in is not just sort of one company's idea, but an idea that has been viewed by all the different member companies and all the technical teams we have. And so we do have those moments where we take a tool, have changes made, resubmit it, and do a second review. And then that last step of 26 tools under review, that's sort of the pool of tools available. There's not an expectation that we're going to add in 26 more tools. It's not to say that we're only 2/3 of the way done, or whatever that number would be. Rather, that's sort of the pool of tools that we're going to try to pull in at the last second, just to make sure that we are getting the most valuable gains. But there's certainly tools that we're willing to say, you know what, there might be something here, but it's going to take a long time to figure out, so let's just figure it out for a future codec. And many of those 26 tools will be part of that process. Basically, we're at a point with the codec where it would be a successful outcome if we decide to publish today. Like these savings, I think, are sort of in line with what Netflix, what YouTube have said would be the thresholds they would need to hit in order to launch a new codec and start to re-encode their content. That said, I think we're still shooting for sort of the 35% target, with those sort of 5 tools in conditional range and another sort of 25 tools floating around. And we're actually closer to that today. I think the latest I heard was sort of 29, but we couldn't finish running the encodes, of course. And so those are sort of the results that are still coming. In terms of timeline, what we're looking at for soft bitstream freeze, I know we talked about doing that at the end of October. We decided to push it for those 5 tools to sort of the end of this month. And so we're sort of at a stage where we're happy with the codec, but we're just like trying to make sure that we have the exact right tools that we want. The vast majority of that work is done, and we accordingly moved the bitstream freeze to January 2018, but really in the same time frame at this point. I think we're far enough along that dates are not moving as much, which is nice. We are also planning to do some demos. So obviously the folks at Bitmovin and Mozilla have had some demos out in Nightly, where they've just been sort of using the very latest Git hash and putting together a version of the codec that works. We thought about doing something a little bit more in-depth for Chrome and YouTube. So we actually went through and picked a specific stable point that we liked in the codec, which is actually very similar to the results you saw from sort of mid-September, and are using that to actually get into the dev channel of Chrome by the end of this month. So that's something that hopefully you can just go into, flip a flag, and start playing AV1 videos through the YouTube pipeline. So that's sort of just our confirmation end-to-end that everything works. It lets partners kind of test things out. Not necessarily meant for mass public consumption, but it sort of shows our usage. And just have links to more information. The last thing I wanted to touch on was sort of the complexity question, because I know that came up in the earlier talks. And the codec is definitely very slow at the slowest setting today. It's very much on the order of 200 or so times slower than VP9 for encode. But what I want to really highlight is for VP9 and other codecs that we've developed, the sort of absolute slowest mode has never been the mode that we've traditionally used. At YouTube, we've used speed setting 2 as opposed to speed setting 0, and that actually makes quite a bit of difference on speed. It ends up being, probably about 50 times faster. And so I think there's a version of AV1 that we're targeting by the end of the year to have that would be about 20 times slower than VP9, still slower than we liked, but getting much closer, with only about 1% compression loss compared to our absolute maximum sort of research potential. So we published the research results with the absolute slowest settings, but we are hoping to have something that's close to usable by the end of the year. And of course, even after we freeze the bitstream, that's when we do the majority of our optimization work to really get things working as fast as possible, sort of within the 5 to 10x range of VP9 encode. And on the decode side, we're shooting to be 50% slower than VP9. So, less than double the decode complexity.
In that case, thank you very much.
Thanks.